I'm also going to start recording here. It may ask you for permission on your screen for us to record or for your consent to be recorded. Okay, everybody, we had a little bit of a technical difficulty there, so thanks for bearing with us. But in the interest of time and making sure we get through everything and also have enough time to hear from everybody who'd like to share out and discuss, we're just going to go ahead and get started. So first, I'd like to just kind of bring us in with a little grounding exercise and make sure we're all in the same space here together. So I want to invite you to bring to mind a recent emotional storm, nothing too heavy, thinking of perhaps frustration with the recent gas issues, or if you're like me and have an almost 3-nager in your life, something like that. And while you're thinking of this storm, you might know or notice that it's difficult to find anything effective to do about the issues while you're dealing with the emotions. So first, we're going to drop an anchor. And the anchor doesn't make the storm go away. The anchor is there to hold us steady until the storm passes in its own time. So while you're experiencing this, push your feet hard into the floor. Sit forward in your chair and straighten your back. Press your fingertips together. Move your elbows. Move your shoulders. Feel your arms moving all the way from your fingers to your shoulder blades. Notice that there's pain here that you're struggling with in this emotional storm. And there's also a body around that pain, a body that can move and that you can control. Just notice your whole body now. Hands, feet, back. Maybe stretch a little. Press your feet down. Now look around the room and notice 5 things you see. And notice 3 things you hear. And also notice you and I here together as a team. There's something that you might be struggling with, but you're also noticing your body in the chair, moving it, taking control of your arms and legs, and noticing the room around you. And there's you and I together here as a team. And when you're ready, just take a deep breath and kind of come on back. I chose this grounding exercise for us tonight because we're going to be talking about this idea, this metaphor of using an anchor. And it's also something, you'll get the script of this tonight in a packet with a bunch of other information as well. And it's something that you can use with yourself or with the kids in your life and lead them through that. And I'm realizing now as I look at the screen that I kind of skipped over a few steps here. I was so excited about our grounding that I just went right past all of the intro stuff to get there. So thank you for taking a moment and kind of centering with me. And now we'll back up with introductions and a welcome. So welcome. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. This is our 3rd week of our Reentry and Reopening with Children series. My name is Katy Reynolds. I'm a licensed professional counselor and a certified trauma and resilience practitioner. with ChildSavers. I'm on our school-based team. And it is just really exciting to be here with you tonight. We want to definitely take a moment and shout out Ernst Young, who are some of our community partners who not only helped make this happen for us, but also helped make this free for us to bring to you. So that was really, really exciting. Thank you so much, Ernst Young. We really, really appreciate it and your support. So I'm going to just kind of get right in. Today we're going to be talking about quite a number of things. We're going to be learning about the impact of stress on humans in general. We're talking about a very wide age range tonight because we're talking about the children in your lives, but we're also talking a little bit about you and the important role that you play in helping the children in your lives learn some of these really important skills. So we're going to be focusing a bit on adult modeling and the impact that that can have. And then we're going to really identify, 5 primary steps in helping children learn these social emotional skills. So before we get into the skills themselves and talk about the tips and tricks, and I do really want to hear from all of you guys on what you're using as well. Really excited for that part of this. But before we get there, I think it's important that we kind of take a moment and really look at the brain and the body and what's happening with stress so we can understand the biological component. So I invite you guys to do this with me. I'm going to show you a little bit of Dan Siegel's model of the brain that he uses. And I'm noticing already, it's like it was just immediately in puppet mode. It's already kind of looking different ways. But if you think of your hand and your wrist like a brain, and we look at it this way, this part of our brain, if it was a brain model, would be like the brain stem, and this part would be the limbic system. And together, the brain stem and the limbic system really help us work through emotional regulation and things like a fight, flight, freeze response, and some of our also just biological components of our body, like regular breath and our blood moving through our veins. And then this top part of the brain here, the cortex, is a lot of the higher functioning stuff. And this first part here, if we're looking, and this is kind of like the front of the head, this would be the prefrontal cortex right here. This part of the brain is really, really important in decision making, in communicating, and in behavior regulation. So what happens when we are really stressed or when we have a clear stressor that's in our life, basically our lid kind of flips and our lower part of our brain, our subcortical part of our brain, again, the brain stem and the limbic system, work together to kind of assess, do we know this threat? Have we seen this before? Or is this something new? And then they decide, is it a threat or is it not? And this is a really, really quick reaction, like what we might consider like a gut reaction. This is not the thinking part of your brain like, oh, I wonder if this is a threat. This is happening before you even recognize what's going on consciously. So they're going to determine, is it a threat or is it not? And if it's a threat, your lid flips. And basically your body and your brain does this to conserve energy and to really conserve focus so that your brain and your body can be aligned on really survival. So in this moment, when your lid is flipped, as Dan Siegel likes to say, what we see in the body is that several hormones start to release. So the big players are here are adrenaline and cortisol, which is actually called like the stress hormone because it has such a big part in this. So the adrenal gland releases that cortisol, and those together increase your heartbeat to increase your blood flow, increase the rate of your breath, increase the amount of oxygen coming into your body, and they also slow down your digestion in order to conserve fat and energy. So you might notice as I'm kind of talking through this that those are really like primal biological needs from our body and really preparing for threat and survival. So this system is very, again, very just biological, very primal, and its entire goal in the system is to help protect self and to help increase the rates of survival. This is something that's come with us from the very beginning of man and has stayed with us this whole time. And it is not something that has changed. It's something that's stayed the same, and it still lives within us. So now what we see in our current world is our threats have changed a lot. You know, we're not really dealing with like saber-toothed tigers anymore, for example, but your body doesn't know that. Your body doesn't have a way to discern between the different types of threat. It just kind of has like a yes, no, is it a threat? Is it not? And then it goes through this process. So when you're in this process, you know, as you can imagine, from what we see, particularly this happens for all of us, but particularly what we see from our children is kind of a wide range of reactions here. Thinking of different options like hyperactivity versus retreating. You know, again, that flight versus freeze, or fight versus freeze, excuse me. But on a biological level, it's the same. We're having the same system and pattern activated, but the behavior might be different on the outside. And I really wanted to name that because I think that's something as adults, the perception around that is really different. And those big need behaviors that we see often end up defined as like the problem behaviors, right? Those big hyperactivities, the kids that are flight kids that might run, those kind of behaviors are usually the ones that really get flagged as, oh no, something's wrong, or we need to change something. Please help us. You know, those are the big behaviors that a lot of folks want to change, but really important to not forget about those kids that retreat. That can often look like compliance to a lot of people. And, you know, I know I'm talking about stress here, and so far we've talked about kind of negative ideas of stress, but there are positive stressors too, right? Thinking of things like when you have a baby, or when you're getting married. Those can be really stressful life experiences. But again, your body doesn't really have a way to discern between that. It's just going to feel the reactions and kind of move through the pattern accordingly. And it's really interesting to see that research even shows that after some of those like positive stress moments, rates of things like car accidents go up, because again, our bodies are innately still going through this process. We don't have access to all of our decision-making skills, behavior management, regulation, language, all of those pieces that we really rely on. So when we think about it in this context, it's really important that we start to consider adjusting our expectations. You know, and there's an opportunity here. Like when we think about this specific experience of the pandemic and all that we've been through over the last year, you know, we know it's not the end of it, of the effect or the impact of it. So social emotional learning is now imperative to how we get through it, particularly when we think about how long we get through it, because if we try to rush through things, that can really increase the stress response, because we're not giving enough time to kind of gradually walk through the steps and become more adjusted in that way. Again, I want to highlight for folks that weren't here with us during earlier weeks, we kind of talked about this idea, I've heard from a psychologist, of kind of gauging how long that transition period should be. And his philosophy was, if we look at and we consider the pandemic to be around 12 months, let's say, his philosophy was that you could take the square root of the amount of time that the incident had happened, and that would give you a ballpark range of how long and how gradual the process to return or normal needed to be. So if we think about the pandemic as around 12 months, the square root of that is around 3.5 months, to give you an idea of what we're trying to span this out to. Just going to take a quick glance in the chat, but I think see a couple things. Thanks, Bob. All right, we're going to keep it going. Again, those of you that were with us in earlier weeks might remember this from week 1. Really just taking a moment to kind of reframe what we're seeing here, or what we might see coming up. Sometimes, again, when we see that certain behaviors, especially those that are triggering to us personally, it can be really uncomfortable, but I find it really helpful to think of this metaphor. The idea that something we kind of break down in order to change and evolve to its next stage of growth. So really thinking of this seed metaphor here can help to kind of reframe and normalize what we're seeing and help make it not so triggering. Actually, before we get too far into the other stuff, I wonder if anyone has any specific questions around those pieces before we kind of move past the biological function and how our body responds to stress. Okay. If you have any questions around that, I'm just going to pause for just a second here to leave some space for that. Feel free to put it in the chat or unmute. Okay, oh, there might be something. I see a question from Barbara around deconstruction. I'm not sure that I fully understand the question, or if you just really wanted to highlight it for us. Could you share a bit more on that? Yes, to construct, we must deconstruct. Yeah, absolutely, Barbara. Thanks so much for highlighting that for us. I think that is so important that we keep that in mind. Our kiddos are really walking through that literally right now. And honestly, we ourselves in a lot of ways have been walking through that the last year and a half as well. Okay, so when we think about social emotional learning in adults, it really comes down to increasing self-awareness and self-management. Social emotional learning is the process through which children and adults understand and manage emotions, feel and show empathy for others, and establish and maintain healthy relationships. Again, we've been talking in previous weeks about how children manage transition and change best when adults respond predictably, consistently to children's needs, engage children in warm and supportive interactions, and model positive social behavior. So thinking from that context, we really are one of the best and most effective tools our kiddos have for how to gauge what's been going on, where's normal, what's happening with all of this, and also the tools about how to move forward. We ourselves have been through a lot, like I mentioned, and there's no shame in that. There's absolutely no shame at all. I do understand a level of maybe developmentally appropriate ways to talk with children about the stress, or how much or how little you might want to share with them. But in general, naming the stress and attaching some sort of emotion to it is really, really important. So when we think about these steps, increasing self-awareness and self-management, we ourselves are kind of going through, again, that biological pattern, right, of where our innate reaction is going to be to react impulsively and to react through the patterns that are either most available or that we've seen the most in the past. And it's the same for our kids. So first, it's really helpful if we can practice these skills also outside of our emotional storms, when we have had a chance to really practice and solidify the tools that we're using in lower stress moments. It makes it very much easier to attempt to use them in higher stress moments and use them in a more effective way. But all of these things will take a lot of consistency and practicing over time and time again. So it can be helpful when you feel triggered or dysregulated yourself to kind of start with some information gathering. Really just taking some time to recognize and name for yourself. Again, this can be in your head, in your internal monologue, or out loud, depending on who you're with, and if you're modeling for a child in your life. Naming, recognizing and naming the emotions that are happening. And then the goal is to not get swept up into the emotion. So this is part of that anchor piece that we practiced at the beginning. Noticing our physical responses, bringing ourselves back to the present in a way where it's not so much about distraction as it is about honoring and acknowledging in a non-judgmental way, and then bringing our attention to other pieces of the present moment, especially those things that we can control, things like parts of your body, things like your breath, and just really taking a moment to help and getting curious about what those reactions could mean. Um, the research on emotions is really interesting in that I'm just learning this myself, that emotions have a beginning, a middle, and an end. And they really serve and their primary focus as information from your body to your brain in an effort to try to help you figure out, what can I do next? So getting curious about what the emotion is, what the trigger might be, what that information of that emotion might be telling you about what's going on in the world around you, and how you can make a best decision from there about how to respond. And when you're ready to respond, really responding to that underlying need, not just hitting the surface of the behavior. This can be really an easy space to shame ourselves around, especially when it's things that compete with what our social or cultural norms are. But again, this is about your individual process and responding to the need that you have, and really honoring space for your needs. And then we take this to noticing the impact on others around you. This is where we can start to get a feel too for how our emotions, how our own triggers are having us respond and maybe even project on folks around us. This can be really, it's a process that happens pretty easily, particularly for people we're comfortable with, and or we might feel like we have some power over. So unfortunately, it's a pretty common pattern for adults to kind of have their own trigger, and not necessarily intentionally, but project the result of that out on others, and particularly kids. Um, and this last question here, who owns the problem, is something that you might consider in terms of separating your own stuff from your child's stuff, or the child you're working with stuff. This really kind of feeds into natural consequences, and just recognizing sometimes we have goals that don't align together with the kids that we're working with or serving. So an example might be, gosh, I walked through this the other day with my kiddo. I was ready to leave the house. We needed to go. It was morning, and she was in a mood, and she wanted to have her boots on, and so she threw this huge temper tantrum, and that really triggered me, because I was like, we need to leave the house. I don't think you understand. But really, like, stepping back and thinking about who owns that problem. I have the problem of having the right, of when I need to be at work and what she needs to do to help me get there. It's not really her problem. Her problem is she's 2 and she can't put on her shoes by herself. So sometimes that can just help us in our reflection period there, of taking a step back and really thinking about who's or what, and how we might be triggering each other, to just kind of separate them apart, in order for us to better respond to the needs of both parties involved. Seeing quite a bit of chat that came through, so I just want to double check to see if there's any questions. Yes, Barbara, let them play, let the kids play. I'm so down for that. And yes. Awesome. Feeling a lot of love from the chat. Thanks, guys. So glad that this is what we were looking for tonight. So that kind of brings us into, just thinking about the importance of the role of the adult, um, for one, for yourself, right, in surviving those difficult moments. Um, but also, again, thinking of yourself, you are a constant tool and model and way of learning for the children in your life. So every time you succeed in showing some of that and being vulnerable, and you don't have to work through it perfectly, but just trying those steps, you're helping the children in your life build social emotional learning skills. And if we were to really break down the steps of how to help teach children social emotional skills, it really comes down to 5 pieces. And I kind of struggled when writing this of if I wanted to do numbers or bullets, because it's not necessarily like a stair step order. It's not like you have to have one mastered to get down to 5, but in a lot of ways they are building blocks that build off of each other. And again, you'll notice that those first two are the exact same two that we really highlighted with adults as well. Self-awareness is one of those first pieces that we just really can't skip over. In order to understand that I have something going on that I have a need for, or that I have some sort of emotional reaction to, or whatever it might be, I need to have some awareness around the fact that that's happening. And it's really helpful to be able to build this skill with children, often by like reflecting what you see, and helping to build that emotional language beforehand. Next step would be that self-management piece. So this is where we start to see the attempts at being able to regulate on their own, or being able to ask for what they need to regulate. And after having some of that self-awareness and that ability to do some regulation on yourself, you can start to look into how, just again with adults, how that emotional reaction is impacting others, or how you're interfacing with others when that's happening, and building that social awareness. And after gaining some more social awareness, we can really increase those relationship building skills and really get to that decision making. And I really want to highlight how decision making is at the very bottom here. I want to highlight that because I think when we as adults want to see a child behave or maybe cope with a situation differently, we often encourage them to engage those decision making skills, right? Like use your words, or why can't you make a different decision, right? Those types of things. And it's not that that's not possible, but again, kind of coming back to that biological space of understanding the full biological pattern and response that's happening there. It's kind of unfair of us in some ways, right? To be asking that of kids and teens, especially our littles. Age and development plays a huge part here, because what we know about the brain and the body, well, particularly the brain here, is that it doesn't stop growing until around age 26. And we also know that the amygdala grows first, and that limbic system grows first, and the prefrontal cortex grows slower and is one of the last pieces to fully develop. So really hear me on that. That prefrontal cortex, that decision-making part of our brain that accesses problem solving and language and behavior regulation, is one of the last pieces to fully develop, which is not till around age 26. Okay, so just really thinking about what we're asking from the children in our lives when we're asking them to kind of walk through a lot of these big things, particularly independently. It's a big ask, and they're not being difficult. It's a, biologically they're not able to really do that, and sometimes we see that they can in some moments, but we just can't confuse that with being able to do it all the time. Really building those skills. I maybe should have gone to the slide next. You can see that I was thinking of talking with you guys about that tie to brain development there. And really, again, highlighting that kids learn much, much more from what adults do more than when adults say. Again, this comes down to how we learn and how we store memories. And we store memories mostly through our senses. It's part of the reason why when you think back to some of your particularly like your early memories or longer memories, you're not going to really remember like all the specifics of that, right? Like you tend to remember maybe some things that you saw, maybe some things that you heard, especially smell. Smell can be really, really strongly tied. Um, so that's just how we store information is through those receptors. So the more that you do to physically show the children in your lives how to walk through these processes, that's how they're going to learn the skills to be able to model it and practice and do it on their own. Really starting with that competence as a foundation. Um, I see this a lot in therapy, actually. I think there's a misconception that sometimes when you focus on the negative, that's kind of a way, or the problem or whatever it might be, that's kind of a way to help ensure growth because you're really hyper focusing on it. And that's really not true. I mean, there's definitely a reason to know where the growth areas are and where the challenges are. But whenever we're trying to build up skills and resources, we have to find first where people are competent and or confident, and really using those skills and abilities to help them shore up the other ones that they might be missing. And I added this last line here because I think often as adults, we like to try to help encourage, continue or reinforce behavior through praise models, which is not bad at all. But I really wanted to just make sure to encourage you guys to notice the steps along the way, really highlight the effort pieces that you're seeing from kids. This truthfully really expands like way far outside of social emotional learning stuff. I would say this really applies to like all of the things in child development and learning. But we're praising the effort, not the result, because we're expecting and we know that there will be failures, right? There will be mistakes, there will be setbacks. Those are all part of the growth process and the change process. So when we tie our praise solely to the end product, it really kind of has this impact of you're only good or you're only doing the right thing or whatever it might be if you can reach that end goal. And that's actually really not true. It's the steps along the way and repeating the steps along the way consistently, time and time again, that will start to get you the consistent end goal that you're looking for. So this might be another good place to pause. I think we're kind of through most of our content here. Yeah. Yeah, Greg, that's so true about with younger kids, they don't have the perception of knowing if there is a problem. It's it's definitely one of the things I come up against. A lot of highlights of that 26 years old. I know, Debbie, when I learned that, honestly, guys, I was a little taken aback, a little scared. I was like, oh gosh, 26, it's just such a different, it's such a different mindset of how people grow and learn. I think in our culture, for some reason, it's like, we have the 18 as like this marker, and I often actually hear from adults and caregivers, even before 18, they're like, they're almost grown, they're so close to being an adult, like they need to be able to do X, Y, and Z. And then you sit back and you're like, oh man, their brain isn't going to be fully grown for another 10 years. It really kind of helps put it in perspective that they're still learning and forming a lot of things. And humans by nature, we learn through experimenting and by making mistakes, so we got to cut them a little bit of slack. um okay, before I kind of open up to our reflection questions and kind of really opening up the floor for discussion and hearing from you guys, I just want to check in to see if anybody has questions or comments specific to the material that's been shared so far. Okay. You guys might be a little tired tonight. I don't know. Okay. So you guys know that we've been ending our weeks here with just some reflection questions, which you're welcome to save and do on your own, but we're also kind of using them as a way to hear from each other and prompt conversation. So I'm curious, I'm thinking of this first question and I'm really wanting to shift it a little bit to think about what you guys have been going through during this last like 12 months or so. And I'm wondering if anybody would feel comfortable sharing what kind of social emotional skills do you feel like you've noticed, or maybe just now are noticing that you've been modeling for the children in your life? See some information coming through the chat. Yeah, Cindy, so glad to hear you're taking that away of effort, not the result. That's so great. I know you guys are modeling some sort of skills. It's definitely out there. And maybe a different way to think about it is thinking about what's helped you get through this, what's been going on that your kids have been seeing as you've been managing your own stress. Okay, so we do have something popping up in the chat here. Bob is saying, effort has been so important this year because results have been so out of reach. Um, and a question that he has is around how to role model asking for help without asking children to meet my own needs. Oh, Bob, of course, you're going to throw me a big question. No, but a really, really important question. Um, I think it's definitely a balancing act. We don't want our children to become the caregivers. It's not that's not the role they should be filling for us for a variety of reasons that we can get into another time. But um, I think in general, modeling asking for help, particularly to others, is really helpful for kids to say to see, for us to say, you know, oh gosh, I need a little more time. I'm going to need a little more help with this. Let's call grandma. Maybe she can help out. That kind of thing is really helpful. And I think it also kind of prompts a discussion within that, or just bringing the conversation up of what do I have within myself to control and what resources are available to me as an individual, and what do I need to reach out to my community, or my family, or the support people in my life who can help take a little bit on. So just kind of even bringing that dialogue into the room can be really helpful. Oh, Greg is sharing that he's been managing stress through discussion with his best friends and family. Yeah, that can be really, really helpful. That social connection um, can be really helpful in managing our stress levels. Finding something to laugh about. Barbara, that's one of my favorite coping skills, can I tell you? I think people discount that, but laughter is so healing, you guys, and it's really fun. And there's kind of a weird part of our brain that tricks ourselves into an emotion if you start kind of practicing it. Bob might be able to tell you more about this through his experience in drama therapy, but if you start kind of acting like you're laughing, it will bring in the emotions and the biological mechanisms of feeling, happiness and laughter, which is so funny. If you have not checked out laughter yoga, which is a real thing, and it's not anything like you think it is, but it's kind of like almost like a meditation or a mindfulness exercise where you're again intentionally kind of tricking your body into absorbing those natural resources that we get through humor and laughter. Such a great one, Barbara. Thanks for bringing that up. Yes. Let's see. Jacqueline is talking about she's been moving her stress into painting. I just want to say also, I love how you phrase that of moving the stress into painting. There's something really beautiful about thinking about that in terms of energy and outlets of it being something literal, right? That we're pushing out of us and into something external. That's really beautiful. Shifting the point of view to seeing the silver lining. Yeah, this sounds a lot like reframing to me, which yes is so important. Kind of brings to mind again, like we've talked about a lot in this series, at least that metaphor and picture of the seeds and growth and thinking of change. You know, when you look at it, you could certainly get lost in the change and destruction of that seed because it's there. There's no discounting that. But there's something really powerful about kind of a radical acceptance around, yes, the seed is breaking or changing or, you know, whatever word you might want to use there, and then shifting it very intentionally to it's transforming, it's growth, right? It's not fake to do that. It's really an art of finding the reframe. Wendy, clarifying what we have control over. I wonder if I can call you in on this a bit, Wendy. Feel free to do it in the chat or to unmute yourself. But I'm wondering if you could just speak a little bit more to how you're modeling that for the child or children in your life.
Probably thinking about, particularly with COVID, there was a lot of things that were just, they were requirements that we needed to do for our health and well-being and to obey the laws of the land. So that sense of, yeah, they're out of our control. We just need to look at, well, what are we happy with and what can we be thankful for in the place where we are, that we're safe, that we have healthcare, that we have options and we've still got power, we've still got comforts. So just being able to sort of frame things in that way so that we're focusing on, okay, today, what decision can we make for something fun that is within our framework?
Yes. Oh, thank you so much for sharing more on that. I think that's so beautiful and just so empowering to think of the littles in your life hearing from you. I don't have control over all of this. You know, kids sometimes look at us and they're like, you're the adult, you know all the things, you have all the power and all the answers. Fix this, you know. And that's just, of course, like we know that's not true. But really naming that for them of I don't have control over this. This makes me feel anxious or fearful too. But these are the things that we can control. Really helps to not only like shift the mindset there and reframe, but also really lowers the anxiety level, right? Because when you're feeling really anxious, it tends to be things like, I'm feeling so out of control with my world. I don't know how to handle the things or how to cope with them. And then you're kind of shifting and saying, oh, but here are the things that we can do and can control. And that can be so empowering and soothing. Thank you so much, Wendy. Yeah, a lot of positivity. Oh, Greg, yeah, laughter will probably be easier when masks are no longer required. I know I'm really missing people's smiles. Can I tell you guys, I am like one of those people who's like smiling under my mask. And then I realize later, I'm like, I hope they know I'm smiling. um, movement. Bethany, yes, movement. I wonder if I can call you in on that one. Um, what are you modeling here for the littles in your life with the movement? I wonder if you can connect it to some of the social emotional things that might be behind it, if you're willing.
I know with a lot of the kids I work with, we talk a lot about movements that like complete the stress cycle. So like jumping up and down or running or pushing something, like a lot of sensory activities. And I feel like I get something out of those activities as well. So I can share stories of when I felt really stressed and then I took the dogs on a walk and then I felt way better.
Yes. Oh, Thank you so much for sharing out on that. I'm so glad to hear more from you because I love that you talked about using movement strategically to finish the stress cycle because that's like the golden ticket right there, right? Using it as a strategy. And I talked a little bit about earlier about like who owns the problem and identifying and knowing our own triggers that come up. A trigger that I often see from adults is just this desire to control. Because again, like we kind of just talked about a second ago, feeling like you can control something helps to alleviate your own anxiety and your own emotions that are coming up. And so we kind of innately do that with kids, right? We're like, oh, you are having all of the things, you are doing way too much. You need to bring it down like 5 notches. So you need to go sit in this chair. And our attempt there is to try to like control it, right? To bring it down. And I think there's kind of a disconnect there in that it might feel kind of self-soothing to us in some ways. Like we feel like, okay, we got the message across, we got the energy level down, hopefully, if the kid even engages in that. But it's kind of a misconception because what we're really doing there is we're really putting our own needs, our own problems first. And using movement in a really strategic way can be soothing and helpful to both the adult and the kid. As Bethany just mentioned, kind of letting the stress process complete its cycle for the kid, and also you're as the adult still giving them that containment, right? It's not like you're running laps and you're just doing whatever. Like if you're doing 20 push-ups, that's a very clear way of directing the energy so that the child can still walk through their regulation needs. And you as the adult are also getting a little control around it. So it's kind of a 2-for-1. So I'm so, so glad that you brought that forward. Thank you so much. I'm just kind of looking back over the chat. We have so much good stuff happening over here. Oh, wow. Howard and Joni, you brought a lot. Starting in the morning with praise and dancing and singing. Oh, this sounds like a beautiful space, Howard and Joni. I'm coming over. They have a lot of nature over there. Nature also, if you can find a way to use it with your kiddos, it's not just getting outside, although the fresh air is really healing. Um, there's also a lot to, again, the biological components around it. I think one that a lot of people know and recognize is vitamin D is a really important vitamin. It's hard for us to get it from food. I think, if I remember correctly, the only like natural food source of it is something like mushrooms randomly. But we get a lot of it from the sun. So we need that interaction with the sun really helps us to balance out, again, like a vitamin, There's also a lot of really interesting research with like hospitals and patients who are in more confined spaces where if they can see trees, it actually helps their recovery time. And it doesn't even necessarily need to be a real tree. I think they've also done it where it's like a poster. Um, so really bringing in nature in some creative ways, like Howard and Joni have talked about here, can be really, really beneficial in the social emotional learning process. Oh, and Debbie was kind of reiterating some of those too. And Bob, all the nature. Yes. Yes, Barbara and Debbie, pets. Again, kind of I'm bringing all the science to you guys tonight. I was not planning this, but it's just coming out. There's an interesting thing that happens when we pet pets. It releases dopamine in our brain, very literally. So this is part of the reason why things like therapy animals are really, really helpful and soothing for a lot of folks. It is absolutely a great strategy to use. Yes, Cindy, I'm so glad you're pulling that out about the anchor script because I'm realizing that I didn't note it specifically, but those points in that script, I did not write that script. I can't take credit for it. But those intentional places in that script where they kind of named the hurt, the emotional storm, and then brought about that sense of security and relationship. That's one of the pieces I felt was so powerful. And they did that very intentionally because we don't want it to just be a distraction model again. The point in using some of those things is to increase our awareness. So not to avoid, but to really look forward. And yeah, and then having these moments where there's a connection and relationship building piece within it. So, so powerful. Gosh, you have great things you guys are doing in the world out there. Keep it up. Keep it up. Um, you know, I want to keep going with this, but um, I want to see what you guys need here. Oh, there's more happening. Aromatherapy, Marlene, yes, I'm big into that too. One of my favorite sensory items right now that I actually keep at my desk, I don't know if Bob knows this about me, but that I keep at my desk for meetings and stuff when I'm feeling really anxious myself, is this stuff, I think it's called like therapy dough. And guys, it's like Play-Doh for adults. Same idea, I love regular Play-Doh too. And I think regular Play-Doh too is probably more budget friendly, to be totally honest with you. But this stuff, it has like a nicer texture, and then it has scents within it. So the one I have has like lavender in it, and it is just very soothing and grounding to kind of, and again, I like have my hands below my screen. And so I can just be sitting there playing with Play-Doh and smelling this great lavender, and nobody knows. And I'm self-regulating, and it's great. I'd like to think that those are the things I'm modeling for my daughter, but you know, I got to be honest, guys. You guys shared a lot of positive, great moments, but I'm just going to kind of use myself to challenge and bring in, like, there are moments where we all hit our breaking point, right? I mean, and that's just real and normal. I have them too, and I do this for a living. You know. It's totally fine that that might happen sometimes, right? It's not our best self. It's not a great look. It's not how we necessarily want to do things, but we all reach our limit sometimes. And I just want to encourage you to that. If that happens, if that comes up in your life, know that you're not a bad person. You're not a bad parent or grandparent or educator. You're human. And that in itself is modeling for the child. And so if you can take a moment, maybe not like right after it's happened, but you know, give it a little time, a little space. And if you can take a moment and come back and repair, right, with the child or children in your lives, and really name that, and say, I'm sorry, I had a rough moment. I was feeling really frustrated because I wanted to keep you safe, and I felt like you weren't listening to me. And I lost it and I yelled at you, and I'm really sorry about that. You know, that in itself, again, is an example of a modeling moment, where you're showing that you're human and that you can be vulnerable and that you can say, I'm sorry. And all of those skills are the type of things that our kids will then take back into the world and do with their friends and their teachers and their people in their life. And that's really what it's all about. We want to keep the goodness going. So we have a few more moments. If anybody wants to step in and share, either in the chat or by unmuting yourself. Okay. I'm not hearing anything. So I think this might be where we call it for tonight. We're right at 9 o'clock here on the East Coast time. But I want to just say thank you guys so much for joining us tonight. And to those of you that have joined us in previous nights, thank you. If you signed up through Eventbrite with us tonight, you will receive a copy of this PowerPoint, a certificate of attendance. You'll also receive a few extra resources for continued learning that we would recommend, and a copy of these reflection questions too. So all of the material will be coming to you, I think tomorrow morning. And so you'll have all of that available. If you did not sign up through Eventbrite, please do so. That's just the email listserv that we're using to send all that material out. So that'll help make it nice and easy for us. But all of that is coming your way. So thank you guys so much. We will have a parent panel hopefully at some point coming up. So stay tuned to that for us. Feel free to go ahead and sign up for our email chain if you're not already on our listserv, and that way you'll get that information when we've decided on a date for that upcoming panel. But thank you guys. Thank you, everybody.